Well, hi there, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Rusty, and this is my channel where I talk about my favorite movies, mostly horror, and my favorite music, mostly metal. And welcome to day 2 of Man Plus Machine week. So this is day 2, and we're going to move on, which what a lot of people have called the male version of the one we just did. The male version of Ex Machina. It does have a completely different story, but it is very, very similar. It's a very, very similar thing, and a lot of this stuff is the same way. I have, and I take umbrage with, I have heard a couple of people say it was an Ex Machina ripoff. Well, okay, Ex Machina came out in 2014. Uncanny came out in 2015. However, Uncanny was filmed before Ex Machina was filmed. It just took them longer because it's an indie film. It took them longer to get it out. So the truth is, Uncanny was made before Ex Machina. So there you go. Uncanny is not a ripoff of Ex Machina. It is a different story, which you will see. Um, but it is very, very similar. And it was filmed before Ex Machina was filmed, even though it came out a year after Ex Machina. So now that that's out of the way, we are going to go through and discuss 2015's Uncanny. I absolutely adore this movie. I yeah, I think honestly I like it more than Ex Machina, to be honest with you. If I had to choose one or the other, I would choose this over Ex Machina. Um, don't really, because they're different stories. I like this story better, and I like the twists better. Um, I also think it's a little bit, well, I don't know, a little bit more to the horror side than Ex Machina is. But in any event, I would choose this over Ex Machina for whatever personal reasons are mine. It's my right to do that. But yes, we have Uncanny from 2015. Now, Uncanny was written by Matthew Leutwyler, was written by Shahin, Chandrasoma, and it stars Mark Webber, David Clayton Rogers, and Lucy Griffiths. Once again, it's a very small cast. It also has Raine Wilson in a small role. Um, yeah, there's 4 people. So this cast is 4 people. And we are going to talk about that as soon as I get my screensavers going. Okay. So this movie opens with Adam and David playing chess. So they're playing chess in this really big, fancy, high-rise apartment. We also see this shady character, Rainn Wilson, plays Castle. He is like Bill Gates. He's like Nathan from Ex Machina. Um, as far as being the top dog, rich person. And Adam and David, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So we see Joy arriving. Joy is a high tech magazine reporter. She also, in the past, was a robotics designer, and she now is a high tech reporter on robotics, and is also well, she's part of a game creation team that makes video games, like like EA or Origin or something like that. She also works as a game creator, but she went to school for and got was getting her master's degree in advanced robotics. So now she does freelance reporting for, you know, a magazine, a high tech magazine. So she is coming to interview David. David is a genius who has a grant from this billionaire, Mr. Castle. He is the CEO of this government contract, really intense robotics design firm. And she gets there, and David starts talking to her. They introduce themselves. He takes her around and shows her all of his inventions, eyes, body prosthetics, the skin, all of this stuff that he has done for this robotics corporation. And she's a little confused. She's like, she's interested. It's not that she's not interested. This is her field of expertise. Um, and so she is very interested in all of it, but she is a little confused because she's been given 7 days access, like Ex Machina. She's been given 7 days access to interview and talk with David. And as she sees all of this stuff that he's showing her, she's sort of like, this is all great. This is fantastic. You're a world renowned roboticist. Um, it's all amazing. I'm thoroughly interested, but 7 days? What is there for me to talk to you with for 7 days? I really don't get that. Well, that's when he then tells her that that's not really what she's there for. That she's not there to just interview him about these inventions of his. Instead, he wants her to come with him back to the living room where he introduces her to his assistant named Adam. So he's like, this is my assistant Adam. And she talks with him for a little bit, and he's like, I'll let y'all talk for a minute. And he goes over there into the kitchen area and is messing around while she sits and talks to Adam. How long have you worked for David? Oh, 7 years? Okay. And so she does this little tiny mini interview with him because David told her to talk to him. And then she goes back over there, and she's like, well, you know, he's a strange guy. Um, he seems a genius like you. Obviously he's got the goods to be your assistant. And that's when, but, other than that, he seems like a normal guy. Well, that's when David then informs her that Adam is not a human, that Adam is a fully functional cyborg. He is this movie's version of Ava from Ex Machina. So she is understandably blown away and doesn't really know what to think about this bomb that has just been dropped on her. And she ends up like leaving, because, that day's interviews and stuff is over. So she has to go home and digest this information while Adam, and now us, the viewer, we now know that Adam is a robot and a cyborg, an AI. And so he's talking with David about how he's not sure whether this is a good idea to introduce him to the world this way at this time. And David reassures him, tells him that everything's going to be all right. So we then move to day two, where she comes back and they continue the interviews. She's watching them play chess. Now, of course, you have to realize there's all kind of dialogue going on as we learn about Adam, and she, in her curiosity, is asking him all these questions, having conversations with him, as well as with Data, as well as David. So, um, she notices that Adam, though, doesn't seem to be as thrilled about this situation. And she even, when David walks off, he even tells her things such as she thinks, he thinks that David just won that chess game and tricked him, and that he likes to humiliate him. So, sort of like Ava, he is telling Joy that David's an asshole, kind of the way Ava was talking about Nathan. So, Joy, of course, now is talking at home, is talking to her friend on the phone, and about David, and is like, yeah, he's a smug. So she thinks he's a genius, but he's kind of smug and arrogant and kind of an asshole. But that she still wants to do the story, and is also, and is that Adam is amazing. He is an amazing creation, and that she's going to blow the world away with this story about Adam. So on day three, David and her are talking about his idea of the perfect AI and everything that goes into creating a perfect AI, what it needs to be, what the components of humanity are. It's sort of a continuation of the same philosophical stuff you heard in Ex Machina. So she ends up, going back and forth between them. She'll talk with David about things, and she'll talk with Adam about things. But she expresses an uncomfortability with how real Adam seems to be, you know. And he does. I mean, you would never for a minute suspect that he wasn't a real cute guy, which is what he is. Both of them are cute. But, so she's a little uncomfortable with how real David seems to be, and how deep his questions are to her in their conversations with one another, and his observations not only about life in general, but her as well. So he ends up even frightening her a little bit when he goes so deep and gets so excited about whatever subject that they were talking about. But, David manages to calm her down, and Adam manages to calm her down after she got a little bit frightened of him. But then again, some humans make you feel that way. They get all excitable and hyper, and you're like, dude, you're freaking me out. Shut the fuck up for a minute. So, she understood that. That's how they calmed her down. So, on day 4, David brings her in, and he takes her into this room, and after they had been discussing about her, giving up her life as a roboticist, and never completing her stuff, well, she had written a thesis in which she had programming and components and everything to make this little robot. So, in a gesture of niceness, because remember, she thought he was a smug asshole, he had actually had the components. He had took her thesis, and he had actually gotten the components made for her. He had made the components of her um, little robot and said, let's work together. And you never got to make it, so let's make it. So that day, she spends the whole day with David and Adam building her little robot. And I guess they were trying to show her that she still had it in her to love this line of work. And she can, she's like, well, I never said I didn't. I just moved on to other things. And I guess they were trying to convince her that she should come back and never give up her dream of being a master roboticist. So that was sort of like personal level. And you see that her and David are actually becoming close. She thinks what he done. So he went from a smug asshole to her like being attracted to him, um, and thinking it was so nice what he did with her thesis. Um, and they end up going up to the roof, him and her, David and Joy. They end up going up to the roof and talking about his isolation in all these years, that people like him are very isolated, and that the world out there is just something that they don't take part of, which is something that she feels herself. Because lots of people who are super geeks um, are isolated by their own nature, um, and it doesn't. They only regret it when they think about it. But as far as daily life goes, that is exactly the way that they want to be. They are happiest that way. They're not isolated because they can't be in society. They're isolated because that's where they're the most comfortable. They're loners. And it only really bothers them maybe when they sit and see a crowd of people at a rave and they wish that they were that way, but it quickly wears off. So that's the kind of conversation that they're having, and they end up actually like holding hands, kind of romantic, falling for each other. And so she seems to be falling for him, and him for her. So when she leaves that evening, she whispers something to David, and you don't really hear what she says, but I'm pretty sure what she asked him was whether Adam, because you see, they had just had a romantic encounter up there. Not sex or anything, but just holding hands, and they kind of like each other. But it still brings up the question of sexuality. So, what she had whispered to him, because they don't let you hear it, but they kind of let you see the way that she asked the question, the way that she looks over there at Adam. I think she asked him, is he fully functional? Does he have sexuality? Does he have a thing that works? Because you can just tell that that's what she's talking about. And he's like, yes, he does, which is kind of proof that that's what they were talking about. And when Adam asks, what were you talking about? David sort of explains to him that people have the right to have secrets and private conversations, and that it just really wasn't any of his business. And you can tell that Adam and David's relationship is kind of being strained, by her presence. So you see that night while David is asleep, you see Adam with the screens, and he is like really doing deep dive research on Joy, her history, her past, her schooling, all of this kind of stuff. You also see him watching hardcore pornography, and you're like, and that's because I think he sees that something's going on between them, and that's maybe has brought sexuality into his mind. So he's researching that as well, and so yeah, but you're not sure because he's a cyborg, right? So could he be falling for her? Caleb fell for Ava, right? And this is an interesting side note. When I told you about that time when she was at home talking with her friend on the phone, about how interesting this wonderful discovery was, her friend was named Caleb, which I thought, since these movies seem so connected, it sounds like a, it sounds like a either a nod to Ex Machina, but then again, how could that be when this was filmed before Ex Machina? I don't know. It's just very interesting that the friend she was talking to on the phone was Caleb, and Caleb is the human star in Ex Machina. So that's kind of weird. That was just a little bit of trivia for you. But so where were we? He's doing the deep dive research on her, and we see him watching hardcore porn. And then on day 5, um, Adam seems very agitated, and he beats David at chess, and which David is very surprised by. You know, like, okay, all right, something must be distracting me. I don't know, like maybe Joy is distracting him. So Joy ends up bringing over a copy of the new game that her team has just created, and they end up like playing it together. It was what was it? It was sort of a flight. It was a space game. So um, they end up doing that. In the meanwhile, though, while they're doing that, we see Adam in the lab, and he's making some kind of weird pouch, and it's like a little pouch with tubes coming out of it that go to these two um, rod-looking things, and he's filling up the pouch with this white fluid that looks kind of like milk, and she ends up walking up on him, and he sort of pushes it to the side and talks to her about whatever they were talking about. She finally then does notice it, and is like, "What is that you're making?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a surprise for later." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And then he gives her a gift, which is like one of the robotic eyes that David had shown her, and said that it was just a prototype stuff, and that she could have it as a gift. And so he gave her a gift of this robotic eye as sort of like a paperweight kind of thing. So she thanks him for that, and she is going to take it home with her. And he gives her the gift. She hugs him, and it turns out when she goes home that night that it was a camera. It was a spy cam. And because she just threw it on her computer desk in her bedroom, facing her bathroom, we see Adam watching her on the on the tablet, watching her um, get into the shower and stuff. So that was kind of creepy for the cyborg, as obviously, well, I guess he is acting like a 15-year-old, right? But Dave, on day 6, we see Dave is teaching her meditation, and we see Adam try to walk into the bathroom while she was in there, and she kind of made a big deal about it, saying that he didn't knock or anything. I mean, and that is true. There's only 3 people there: David and Joy and the cyborg Adam, right? And yet Adam just tries to walk into the bathroom. He tries to walk in there without knocking or anything like that. So she thought that he was trying to bust in on the bathroom, maybe try to see her um, in a vulnerable position. But he gets upset then because she ends up leaving without saying goodbye. And he thinks that she's mad at him about the bathroom incident. So when she's gone, Adam and David get into like a really intense fight about it, calling each other names. Very human of Adam, calling each other names. David accuses him of trying to break in to the bathroom, and that makes Adam very angry. So they end up having this big fight. He ends up telling her the next day about this fight and how shocked he was about it, that he couldn't believe that Adam was talking to him the way that he was talking to him, and that he got as mad as he did, and Adam had to go, cool off. And he tells her that he believes that this argument and how intense it was one of the biggest bits of proof that he had so far that he had created a living, self-aware, conscious organism, because the fight was very human, and it had components of jealousy, rage, even smart-ass comments towards each other. So he believes that that's even further proof that they are on the track, and that Adam is real, that he is the first real, honest-to-goodness, conscious, self-aware AI. So David, then gets Adam alone and tells him that even though that was her last day, that she's going to be coming back the next day, and could he stay in his bedroom because she's coming over for him to cook her dinner and have an actual date, a real date. So Adam, he's like, sure, okay, I can stay in the bedroom and do some coding, programming. And, he had asked him why, and David explained to him that it was okay for him to have a real date, that he had devoted his life to Adam for 7 years, creating him, making him what he was, and that he deserved to have a little bit of life, So Adam seemed to understand, said that he would stay in the room. And they have a real good date, he cooks her sushi, I think. Ugh, I'd never touch that, but he cooked her sushi, and they had this really, wonderful dinner. And afterwards, she goes after him. She goes after David. He's kind of freaked out. She seduces him. He ends up telling her or admitting to her that he's actually a virgin. And she's like, okay. And they end up having sexual relations. So I put they sex. But yeah, she seduces him and they sex. So um, the next morning we see Dave and Adam playing chess, and they argue about objectives because Adam intentionally lets David win. And it kind of pisses David off because he can tell that Adam is making all of these weird moves um, and ending up in checkmate intentionally. And that's when Adam informs him that there's many ways to win. We are playing chess, and it seems like the goal of chess is to what? Corner the king. Checkmate. But what if someone had a different goal? What if their goal was to capture all your pawns? They didn't care about winning the game. Their objective was to capture all of your pawns. Once they've done that, despite the fact that you have just won the chess game by mating their, king, they still won because they achieved their objective. He had done that by changing the objective of the game to capturing his queen, which is metaphorical. So that freaked David out because that's a pretty deep concept. That, he's like, you're an idiot. Why did you make those moves? Because I won. And Adam was like, no, you didn't win. Because my objective was not to do what your objective was. Your objective was to corner my king, the typical objective of chess. My objective was to capture your queen. Once I had captured your queen, I didn't care whether I won the game because I had won my objective. So, makes sense. And so that kind of pissed David off. And they end up having a fight. Now, they kind of separate, and Joy comes over to Adam and is like, calm down, what's going on? And Adam starts talking to her, and he gets like really rude really fast, but he does it so innocently, and that is, he's like, didn't y'all have intercourse last night? How did you enjoy the intercourse? And she's like, what? And he's like, yes, and she's like, that's really none of your business. And he's like, well, I just want to know, did you enjoy the intercourse? Was he a adequate screw? Was he an adequate lover? Did he satisfy you? And she is just like, what the fuck? Sure, yeah, okay, fine. He was perfectly fine. And so Adam is like, okay, great. That's all that I wanted to know. And even you as the audience, are like going, the fuck is going on? So he then was like, well, do you think I could be as well? And she's like, what? And he reaches over and he grabs her and he starts kissing her, trying to kiss her. And she like yells and pushes him off, and then David comes running and he's like, what's going on? And she's like, he just tried to kiss me, like on the mouth, like, a real kiss. He just He just tried it, you know what I mean? He went for it. And David is like um, yelling at Adam, and here they go having another fight. And Adam really goes off this time, and they actually kind of get a little afraid. Both of them get afraid of Adam, and so they start backing up towards the door, and Adam comes after them, and him and uh, David and Adam end up having a knockdown drag out on the floor, and she ends up hitting Adam in the back of the head with like a little statue or something, and he falls on the floor, and David and her end up running out of the apartment, and get to the elevator, and then to the next floor, and then to the stairwell, and they start trying to get away. When all of a sudden, David, you know, grabs his head, and he's like, can you hear that? And she's like, no, I can't hear what? And he just like screams in pain, and he falls on the floor, and you think for a second that Adam was bashing his head on the floor. Maybe he's like had a stroke or an embolism or something, a concussion maybe. So um, when they try to escape, he ends up having that happen. And the next thing you know, after David passes out onto the floor, you wake up back in the room, back in the lab, and Joy is tied to a chair. And in front of her is Adam doing something at the table. And when he moves aside, you see David laying on the table, and he looks dead because his eyes are open. And you see him like doing something in his abdomen, and you're like, holy shit, this, you know, this thing has went nuts. And she, of course, starts screaming and crying, like, don't hurt him. He's your dad. He made you. He created you. He loves you, and you love him, and all this other stuff. So she's freaking the hell out while he's, like, jabbing this thing through that. And, and he turns around and is like, well, could you love me like you love him? Because she screamed that she loved him and not to do that. And, because she thinks he's killing him. And so he's shoving this thing up into his abdomen. And he's like, well, let's just hope you didn't tear it up. And you're like going, what the fuck is going on here? Okay? What the fuck is going on here? Because this shit is blowing my mind, alright? And they then show you like an internal camera view of him going up in there, and he's looking for an electronic component. And so he manages to get it out, and that's when, he's like asking her again, like, could you love me too? And she's like, I could never love a thing like you. You're not even real. And that's when, ta-da, it all like comes to light, because he turns around and informs her that David is the AI. This whole fucking time, David was the AI. Adam is the genius. Adam is the roboticist. David is the real cyborg that she fell in love with, that she screwed. So you're like going, that was good. That was real good, because I didn't see that shit coming even close up. So it turns out that what made David pass out in the hall, or when they were trying to escape the building, is that it broke his Wi-Fi connection to the system in the lab. And that's what short-circuited him, caused his programming and system to fail. So while you're dealing with the shock that this whole movie, that it was David that was the robot, the AI, and she had just been used, like Caleb was used in Ex Machina, that she had just been used to test not only her, but to test David. Now, David legit believed he was the creator. David didn't even know that he was a cyborg. He thought that he was the creator of Adam. He had to play his part correctly, correct? Right? So his programming had to be that way. So you're blown the fuck away. So when she realizes what he is telling her that David was really the android, and that she was basically used as the human component in a Turing test, just like Caleb was in Ex Machina. So now he then begins to interview her about her experiences with David, wanting to know if his thing worked correctly. I mean, they had sex. That was the whole point. He wanted to see if his android could be fully functional, that even another human being would not know that they were with a cyborg. And that pouch that he was making earlier in the movie, he talks about that too. And he was like, he was wondering if it would all work correctly, because it was a standard penile implant that he was working on. Which then made you kind of gross out, because now you know what he was filling that pouch up with that big syringe full of stuff that looked like milk. And you're like, okay. So he wanted the orgasm to be real. Was that his own? Well, it had to be, right? So basically he had filled up this pouch with his own stuff to make it all complete. And you're like, okay. Alright. So now we see the final two scenes of the movie. And that is that you see the real David, which was actually Adam, talking with that billionaire Castle. And they're talking about how this test had all went, that he had seen everything, because Castle had seen everything. He had been watching the entire procedure. So now he's sitting there on the phone with government officials talking about how wonderful this test went. And the real David, whom we knew through this whole movie was as Adam, he is sitting there talking about how, yeah, it was all great, it all worked fine, and that they were ready to move on to the next phase. No telling what the government means by that. But that's who's been funding him, right? So he's got all this funding. They said something about go out and party or something because, next 4 years you'll be stuck in a lab again talking to the real Dave. And you actually see um, Adam, whom we knew as Dave, the cyborg, come in, and I guess he's been wiped or something because Castle looks at him and goes, "Are you okay?" or something, and the guy's like, "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. I'm glad that I functioned properly during this test." So they've obviously reprogrammed him, or Adam has maybe not reprogrammed him, but kind of changed his programming or whatever. And that's when the credits start to roll. But then the credits stop rolling. And you see Joy at her house. They're going through her apartment in sweeping camera view. And you see it zoom in to the bathroom where she's sitting on the loo, the toilet. And as it zooms in on her, you see that she's holding a pregnancy test that's positive. And she looks at the camera like, fuck. And you're kind of left feeling that way too. And then the credits roll, and that's it. So, as you see, it's a great deal like Ex Machina, but it is very, very different at the same time. And it brings up a lot of the same questions. I really feel bad for Joy because, at the end, she's sitting there. I mean, how do you deal with that? You fell for and had sex with a cyborg, and you're pregnant now. Did it click in her head? Because obviously we know, right? We know that was his stuff that he put into David to make the sex act complete and real. So she's pregnant by what we knew through the whole movie as Adam, because when she slept with David, she was really sleeping with the cyborg that he had put his stuff in. So, yeah. So you're kind of left going, geez. Personally, I wouldn't say a word to nobody, right? Because no telling what Adam, or the real David, there's no telling what he would do, right? I mean, granted, he's a millionaire genius roboticist, but he's also mixed up with the government and this secret cyborg research crap. That's the kind of shit that'll get you disappeared, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? First of all, you got to deal with, because obviously David, the real David, obviously he is clocked. And then you're also dealing with this government contractor. Because I tell you, Rainn Wilson, Mr. Castle, he was making jokes to the military guy he was talking about how great the sexual encounter went, and that he had video he would show him. So these are not people that I would trust to let them know I was pregnant from this little experiment they put me in. That's, like I said, that's the kind of thing to get paranoid about. I wouldn't tell anyone. As a matter of fact, my ass would have probably done packed up and moved, you know what I mean? But I wouldn't tell anyone. because that's the kind of stuff you could get disappeared for, in my opinion. But yeah, so that's it. 2015's day 2 of Man plus Machine Week. 2015's Uncanny. Fantastic movie. I really, really love this. And I think if you're into these kinds of movies, kind of subject matter, a fantastic, thought-provoking AI film. And it is. Uncanny. Deception by Design. I think it was very, very well made. It was very well directed, very well written. The dialogue, the philosophical debates and dialogues in this movie are just as good, if not better, than the ones in Ex Machina. It's a little... Well, like I said, I choose this over Ex Machina if I had to, but I don't have to, right? Nobody does. We don't have to. I get to love both of them. I get to own both of them. The world is great. But if for some reason I had to choose one over the other, I would choose this over the other. It was just different enough, and I would choose it. That's all I gotta say. It's just, I would choose this. Thankfully, I don't have to, and I get to have them both. And always remember and never forget, you are a very special person, very unique, very wonderful. There's only one of you, and no matter what anybody is saying or doing to you, you are the only one of you, and you do mean and matter. You mean something, and you matter, and don't ever forget that. And I will see you in the next video. Keep screaming, but only when appropriate. Love you, miss you, bye. And we will be back for day 3 on day 3. So I will see you then. Bye-bye.